to start the lecture on nanotechnology in chemical engineering. So, today we will discuss the applications, particularly the nanomaterials, metals or metal oxides, whatever we have prepared, or carbon based nanomaterials that will be applied for the chemical engineering point of view. So, that is mass transfer, that is one of the important chemical engineering operations. So, there we can use that nanomaterials whatever we prepare. So, for that particularly mass transfer operations. So, here today we will discuss basically the nanomaterials and modified nanomaterials, and that can be used for the CO2 adsorptions, particularly in different industrial process. CO2, that is one of the pollutants, main pollutants, that is in different industrial process, that is generated by combustions or many process, and every day whatever the amount of the CO2 that is generated, we are disposing to the environments, that is here. So, therefore, the amount of the CO2 that is gradually increased day by day in the years. So, currently if we look into that, so in 1980 the amount of the CO2 that was present in air, that was 340 ppms, and currently 2019 it was 408. So, up to 2025, so you can see the amount of the CO2 that is close to 420 ppm level. So, that is gradually increased day by day. So, that actually source is this is the greenhouse gas, and that is the source is different industrials process, that is particularly making steel making, power generations. So, they are actually by burning of coals or natural gas or crude oil. So, we are particularly this CO2 we are generating and increasing. So, actually through this mass transfer operations means here CO2 whatever that is coming to the environments, before disposed to that environments, directly we can capture that CO2. So, that is the source of carbons, and that can be used for conversions of different chemical process for chemical synthesis, let us say methanol synthesis, ethanol synthesis, or different carbon based means urea like. So, we can prepare that. So, by that way we can use CO2. So, therefore, if any flue gas that is contains CO2 means with other gas, CO2 is also present a certain quantity. So, that CO2 we can separate it out. Okay. So, in different industrial process are there. So, here so we use nanomaterials or nanoparticles that would be used for particularly separations, that may be adsorptions based separations, or with that some reactions means reversible reactions should be there with that CO2. CO2 adsorbs and then desorptions, by that way we can capture that CO2. So, here's different nanomaterials, nanofluids, MOF, metal organic framework composite we can prepare, that can be used for CO2 capture or CO2 adsorptions from the process. Okay. So, here's I said different type of nano particles or nanomaterials, nanospheres and nanoseeds, many components we can prepare with the help of nano means structure materials, we can prepare many methods by using, and then that can be used for CO2 separations. Okay. So, here CO2 adsorptions process, in that nanomaterials we can use. So, that CO2 get adsorbed over the surface of the nanomaterials by physical adsorptions, that is called physisorptions. So, here that interactions, physical interactions in between nanomaterials and CO2, and then amine based also nanomaterials we can prepare, amines modified nanomaterials. So, whatever the materials nanomaterials will prepare, let us say carbon nanotubes we can prepare, and then that surface can be modified with amines. So, then or silica we can prepare, and then that would be modified with amine functional groups. So, that would be helpful for the capturing or CO2 adsorptions. So, the may be physisorptions or maybe cavisorptions, and also there is moisture swing nanomaterials. So, that process also we can capture or we can adsorb CO2, that process is chemisorptions. Okay. So, one by one this process we can discuss. So, physical adsorptions of CO2. So, here when physical adsorptions of CO2 in that nanomaterials, that is means there is the interactions in between CO2 and nanomaterials, that is weakly bond formations, that we can say van der Waals force of attractions, that due to that weakly bound that CO2 molecules over the surface of the nanomaterials. So there is no chemical bonding, so weak bond formations in there, and then by that we can separate out those CO2 and then we can capture from that flue gas. Okay, so here's that means absorptions of CO2 on the nanomaterials, that depends many factors. So that surface area of that nanomaterials whatever we have prepared, porosity of the nanomaterials, diffusion paths, and availability of the adjacent sites. So if we are able to prepare the nanomaterials having high surface area, high porosity, and then more adjacent sites, so then that would help us to get more amounts of the CO2 gas that present in the flue gas that we can capture and we can separate it out, okay, in adjacent physical adjacent methods. So directly nanomaterials or functionalized nanomaterials we can use. So here's, if suppose CNT, few examples I am showing: activated carbons, zeolites, metal organic frameworks, boron nitrates or magazines. These are the various useful nanomaterials that we can prepare a particular methods, and then that materials we can use for that capturing of the CO2. So initially activated carbons that was used, that was very low cost and having high thermal stability, so high surface area, so then that materials can be used. And later in the year 2004, so high porosity materials, that is zeolites, was used for that separations of CO2. So it's consist of different type of micropores, macropores, so that is much more better than activated carbons. And later another means MOF type of materials has been developed. It has having high porosity and various active sites are present in that materials, and therefore it can capture or absorb so many CO2, so better than other materials. And then in the year 2013, boron nitrate type of materials, that is 2D type of different type of channels, 2D channels are present, and tunable band gates, this type of materials is present, so that can be synthesized, and these materials having highly structurally stable materials, so that materials can be used for the captures of CO2. And apart from that also, currently magazines also can be used, that having strong coordinations and having more metal sides. So these materials are actually cost efficiency, so for synthesis. So these are the materials different property, means carbon nanotubes, activated carbons, zeolites, that's different type of property that is showing here. So each materials having each means reversible CO2 absorptions, desorptions capacity at ambient conditions, means suppose these carbon nanotubes or activated carbons, it consists of high surface area, so it reversibly CO2 can adsorb at room temperatures or ambient conditions. Similarly zeolites, that is also micropores is present, having it can also interact with the CO2 strongly and it can separate out. Different type of MOF is also there, that also can increase the amount of CO2 separations more. And then boron nitrate already have said, so it is thermally stable. Magazines is also there, so that also can separate out the CO2 from that mixtures, okay. So this capture CO2 captured by carbon nanotubes, activated carbons and zeolites. So adsorbents used, these are the, let's say it has a specific property, and before that we need to means before this CO2 capture or adsorption study of CO2 for mass transfer operations, if we use carbon nanotubes, activated carbons or zeolites, these are the nanomaterials. So then first we have to do the pre-treatments. So first thermal treatments we have to do, so means we have to heated that materials 300 degrees centigrade for 1 hour in presence of inert gas. So then that materials we can activate. Now after that we can do the some chemical modifications by using different type of amines, directly ammonia we can use or monoethanol amines, so that we can use treat that materials, and then some chemical modifications we can do, or APTS we can use, that is APTS 3 amino propyl triethoxysilane, so that is silicon compounds that also we can use. So amine and amine functional groups is also present in that material, so that also we can use to modify that. These are the means carbon materials, carbon based activated carbons or carbon nanotubes or zeolite materials, and then we can reflux for 24 hours. This is the pre-treatment basically. So These are the different adsorbents we can do take, and then thermal treatment, chemical treatments and reflux treatments we can activate that material, and then we can use that material for CO2 captures, and then post treatments we can do oven dry that materials, and by flow of nitrogen at 110° centigrade we can remove that moistures or CO2 that is being adsorbed. So, then second that materials we can reuse for that particular purpose. So, here I said CNT modified CNT, that is CNT APTS modified. So, that we can prepare CNT APTS. So, initially you have to take CNT, and with that means first CNT you have to heat it up at 300° centigrade in presence of nitrogen 1 hour, and after that would be taken in beakers, and then monoethanol amines ammonia or these either one we can use for this process. So, if we use APTS with means here in toluene, so we can use, and then we can do the reflux, cool down to room temperature, filtered, then solid precipitates, and finally by dehydrations we can get CNT APTS. So, it looks like actually this is CNT, let us say raw CNT, then APT that which functionalized this surface of CNT, and then this amine groups is present, and then these groups actually helps for capturing or separations of or adsorptions of CO2. Then CO2 may interact, and then this type of carbonate type of bond formations is there. By that way we can separate it out CO2 by using amine modified CNT or APTS modified CNT that can be used. Okay. So, here means experimental procedures means how we can conduct that experiments or use this type of material. So, here you have to take once reactors you can see or glass chambers, so where we can put these nanomaterials, that is here CAPTS, that whatever this modified CNT whatever we have prepared these materials we can take here a known quantity we can put it here, and after that in lab scale CO2 gas is there, that CO2 gas will be passed, and then for dilutions means to maintain a particular let us say 10% CO2 in years. So, that we have. So, from here we if we want to capture this CO2, so then here will pass through this, and through this CO2 will come at 10%, and then it would pass through this glass, and here materials is that at particular temperature we can maintain that maybe depending upon our absorptions study that may be 30, 40, 50° centigrade. So, after that whatever the gas would come out that would be come to the GC and TCD detectors we can use to detect the amount of the CO2 get adsorbed. Actually here's before here's if it is concentrations of CO2, and here's concentration of CO2, this is in, this is out, that when before this is before passing of CO2, this is before passing the CO2 here. So, here the CO2 concentrations we can measure at this particular point and at this particular point. So, then difference of concentrations we can get with the help of GC, then amount of the CO2 gets adsorbed in this particular materials. So, we can find out. So, then adsorption capacity we can easily calculate. So, here the preparation of the setups and step by steps experiments. So, we can conduct to adsorb the CO2 from that air CO2 mixtures or any mixtures, particular mixtures we can prepare, and in lab scales we can do the study. Here adsorbent loadings, a known quantity of adsorbents or that CN2 modified CNT we can take, and then gas treatment, gas mixings, gas flow rate or flow control with the help of mass flow controllers, and then adsorptions and CO2 measurements with the help of GC or gas chromatograph and using TCD detectors. So, then equilibrium checks, how much quantity of the total amount of CO2 gets adsorbed, that we can find out. Then physicals and chemical adsorptions, that also we can find out physiabsorptions and chemiabsorptions of CO2 on that surface, that we can find out. So, here few calculations is showing. So, here's capital Q, that is the inlet flow rate of that gas. So, here's that inlet flow rate of the gas, here's per liter per minutes we can maintain. So, here's inlet concentration, this is effluent concentration of the CO2 that we can measure with the help of GC that we know. So then if known quantity of amount of that materials or adsorbents that was used, that we know, so then quantify you can do. So amount of CO2 get adsorbed, milligram of the CO2 per gram of adsorbents of that nanomaterials, we can find out total quantity of gas adsorbs, and out of that chemical adsorptions means that whatever that materials we have taken, see here that CO2 gets adsorbed. So that may be physisorptions or chemisorption CO2. So both are there over that materials. So physisorptions is weakly adsorbs materials CO2 through that Van der Waals bonds of attractions is there. So easily it can be removed, means once full adsorptions or equilibrium is reached, and then only and CO2 flow will have to stop, and then only nitrogen will pass, then whatever the CO2 physically adsorbs that will be come out, that we can quantify. Or after that, once there is no CO2 coming out through the effluent streams, so then we have to heat it up, then chemically bounded CO2 that we can calculate, and see if we know the total quantity of the CO2 and chemically bounded CO2. So then if we subtract that, so then physically adsorbed CO2 we can calculate. Okay. So here's initial weights of that material that is not known, means amount of adsorbents that we are using that is known, and once chemically adsorbs CO2 means spent weight of adsorbent until CO2 in the effluent gas stream is undetectable. So that quantity M1 if we know, weight means after CO2 get adsorbed over the materials, some enhancements of weight would be there due to the adsorptions of CO2, that we can put an initial weight, then amount of chemically CO2 adsorbs we can know, total CO2 known, so then physically adsorbed CO2 that we can find out. So here in this process different type of material, that is CNT, APTS CNT, granular activated carbons, APTS activated granular carbons, zeolites, APTS modified zeolites, three different materials was taken, and then physical and chemical adsorptions of CO2 that has been reported here. So amount of you can see, so CNT APTS absorbs, chemical adsorptions is much more better than others materials. Here three different material nanomaterials was taken and compared for CO2 adsorption study, and physically adsorptions also is much more better in case of CNT modified with APTS. Okay. So, amine functionalization CAT, that is physically as well as chemically CO2 adsorption capacity is much more better than activated carbons or zeolites. Okay. So, CO2 adsorption means boron nitrates, that is boron nitrate foams, that is another nanomaterials that also can be used for CO2 adsorptions or separations. So, this is also similar like of graphene type of materials. So, structure is hexagonal similar like graphite type of materials, hexagonal boron, that is also like graphene sheets. Okay, so here this is boron atoms and this is nitrogen atoms. So if all the atoms are replaced with carbon, so that would be graphenes or graphite type of material. So that can be functionalized. So hexagonal boron nitrates, whatever the nanomaterials, that also can be functionalized with PVA. So here's PVA modified boron nitrates was prepared. So here boron nitrates was functionalized by step 1 and this is step 2. So in this process we can get boron nitrates PVA functionalization. So that was used for CO2 absorptions. It has been observed that, so when PVA 1 weight % was used for functionalizations of the boron nitrate, the nanomaterial. So here's the surface area increased 30 to 124 meter square per gram. So if we use means normal boron nitrates, that's giving surface area 30.7 meter square per gram. So when it is functionalized with 1% PVA, so then surface area increase 4 times. Okay, so therefore the materials can capture more CO2 than unmodified boron nitrate. So here it has been observed that, so this boron nitrate PVA modified composite, so that can absorb 320 milligrams of CO2 per grams of that materials at 52 bars. So that is very good quantity of that materials that can absorb. Similarly, Magazines also can be used for CO2 capture or mass separation of the CO2 in the flue from the flue gas. So here's a different type of means mechanisms is showing. So these magazines, that is metals and this is carbons. So it may be chromium magazines, molybdenum magazines. So here's the structures it is showing here. This materials also gets adsorbed CO2 by formations of physical adsorptions or chemisorptions. So when it physically or weakly adsorbs, so this type of structure formations is there in that surface of the metals, so it is get adsorbs, and in surface of the metals, so here CO2 gets adsorbed or chemically bounded. Okay. So here means different type of nanomaterials was taken and the absorption types and absorption capacity that has been shown, and different type of environmental conditions, pressure and temperatures. So it is showing shear pressure and temperature under these conditions. So activated carbons 2.35 millimole per grams CO2 can adsorb, and here at 1 bars and 0 degree centigrade was used. And similarly when that zeolites, boronitrides or mesoporous silica was used, so here you can see that boronitrates that was used, so CO2 capture capacity is better, that is at low high pressure was used and 25 degrees centigrade CO2 captures capacity is this. So 100% select gas absorptions of CO2 as compared to the zeolites, activated carbons or MOF. So boronitrate is much more better than others. Okay. Even other materials also we can use for the captures of CO2. So here's these amine modified nanomaterials that also can be used for that CO2 captures, okay, or mass transfer operations. So um, here's these amine modified nanomaterials. So then nanomaterials may be silica, carbon nanotubes, carbon cellulose, porous polymers, MOFs or porous alumina. These are the different type of nanomaterials we can consider, and then these nanomaterials would be modified with amines. So that may be primary amines or secondary amines we can modify it, and then that can be used for CO2 capture from that flue gas. So in presence of waters or in absence of waters also CO2 gets adsorbed. So when water or moisture is present in this modified amines or nanomaterials functionalized with amines groups, so bicarbonate types of species formations is there. And so when it is dry conditions, when moisture is absent, so this amine modified nanomaterials, this forms this type of carbamates or carbamic acids, means these formations is there. So both means either dry conditions or wet conditions CO2 may get adsorbed, but that by formations of carbonates or carbamate or carbamic acid. So by that way modifications of these nanomaterials we can capture that CO2 either dry conditions or wet conditions. So particularly this type of amines on hydroxyl groups are present in this type of nanomaterials that usually interact with these amine sites or hydroxyl site by formation of carbonates or amine formations. Okay. Here's MCM 48 or SBF 15 silica, these are the silica materials basically SiO2. So that also can be modified with the different amine function groups we can use. So that also can be used for CO2 capture. So here is the 15s 48 one examples I am showing. So here that was modified with means amine cyclic amines, this is the cyclic amines that was used or that was modified. Okay, so this type of structure, so means these functions groups was modified and that can capture CO2 that interact with the CO2. So bicarbonate type of species formations is there, whence that is selectively CO2 get adsorbs over those sites, and then we can capture those CO2 and we can separate out those CO2 from that flue gas, and then by heating we can regenerate that nano modified means surface modified amines, and then we can get CO2. Okay, we can capture CO2. So here for these experimental setups is also given here for CO2 adsorption setups. Here similar type of setups. Here high pressures we can maintain, here's autoclaves is used. So here's amines modifieds, graphene oxide modifieds MOF, so that was taken for CO2 captures at high pressures at 25 degrees centigrade, 303 milligram per gram. So that was CO2 captures and it maintained 94% efficiency after 15 cycles. So this materials is very good. So there are some other materials also I can show here. So that also useful for separations of CO2 by changing that nanomaterials by amine functions or amine functionalizations. So as a result, so we can improve that performance or efficiency of that nanomaterials to capture more amounts of the CO2. By that way we can improve that mass transfer performance or efficiency or CO2 separation efficiency of that materials for a specific means applications. Okay. Even moisture swings also process is there. So where by additions and removals of moistures in that nanomaterials, so we can separate it out that CO2 from that flue gas mixture. So here we have stage 1, we have let us say nanomaterials we have taken. So this is particularly moisture swings in this particulars actually by additions of waters and removals of water. The surface structure changes would be there, that would help for adsorptions of CO2 particularly, means when adsorption is records, then if we add water, so then hydroxyl groups is present there, so then hydroxyl groups capture CO2 and it forms bicarbonate types of species, and when desorption is required, so then we can remove these waters, so then CO2 will be coming out, and then again initially that materials we have taken, so this stage would come back. Okay, so this is actually cyclic process. By additions of moistures we can generate more surface hydroxyl groups that would help to capture more CO2, and so when we need to remove that CO2 means after capturing, so regenerate that CO2 and regenerate that materials, then again we have to remove that waters, and then by that way we can absorption desorption process, means moisture absorption desorption process, we can capture that CO2 through this chemical mechanism. This is chemical mechanism, since here bond formations is there, chemical bond formations for the separation of the CO2 from or capturing of CO2. So this is also similar, means so summary of today's lectures, means for mass transfer operations their nanomaterials we can use or modified nanomaterials. So CO2 adsorptions by nanomaterials for Fiji options, physicals, amine modified nanomaterials that we can use for Fiji options and chemical options, and moisture swings process. Here nanomaterials we can use for CO2 adsorptions and the process is chemical options. So when moisture swing process is there, their nanomaterials is used for captures of CO2. The process is chemical options, and no conventionally nanomaterials if you use that their CO2 gets adsorbed by Fiji options, and amine modified materials when the nanomaterials were modified with amine functional groups that may get adsorbed CO2 or physically or chemically. This is physicals and chemical process or CO2 capturing. Okay. So these are the things we have discussed. So here we can say that various type of nanomaterials are available, so that we can use for that mass transfer operations, that is particularly CO2 captures from that flue gas. So that is important chemical engineering operation. So through that process we can improve that efficiency or performance of CO2 capture from that flue gas. Okay, so today is up to this. Thank you.